Hello and welcome to episode 84 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking CoD Champs. The Call of Duty League season has ended. We are finally done with Modern Warfare 2, maybe, who knows? We're not confirmed, but we think we might be done with Modern Warfare 2. But the season is over. The world champions have been crowned, and we have a lot to talk about. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Doing all right. Happy Juneteenth to everybody, and happy end of season celebrations. And it was I don't want to say too much about the grand finals yet, but it was a pretty exhilarating tournament nonetheless, and I'm ready to hop right in.
Yeah, it might have been the best tournament of the year. We had some really great majors throughout the season, but this Champs just had about everything that you could ask for. We had some upsets. We had some really surprising results, even if they weren't upsets, including the grand finals. Well, that was an upset, but just the way it happened also was very surprising. And obviously, the RosterMania session that will arise from this will be very exciting indeed. But let's talk about the grand finals first. We always, when we recap these big events, the majors and champs, of course, we talk about the winners first, because those are the most important people, the most important team, the team that ends up on top and ends up hoisting that trophy. And in Las Vegas this weekend at the 2023 Call of Duty League Championship, that was the New York Subliners. They finished the CDL regular season out on top, and they finished the CDL postseason on top as well. And what a way they did it. They weren't coming from winner's bracket, which makes them the third team in Call of Duty history to win the world championship, coming from the losers bracket, joining OpTic Gaming in 2017, and one of our favorite teams, Evil Geniuses from World War II in 2018. Both of those teams, not Evil Geniuses, Farico Impact from 2013, which was not one of my favorite teams when I was 15 years old. But they joined, the New York Subliners joined those two teams as the only teams to win CoD Champs from the losers bracket. And the New York Subliners also swept the Toronto Ultra in the grand finals 5-0 in a best-of-9 series, making them the only other team other than Complexity in 2014 to sweep in the grand finals of CoD Champs. Just first thoughts, we will break it down more in depth, go by the maps and kind of break down the series as a whole, but your just general thoughts on the Subliners and a very surprising but dominant victory over the Ultra in the grand finals.
Yeah, I think the best way, for comparison's sake, is I don't remember what episode it would have been at this point, but I'm thinking it would have been the recap for Major 5, because at Major 5 we saw Subliners and Ultra play each other twice. Once again, at that tournament, Ultra won in the first round of the winners bracket 3-2, then Subliners win in losers bracket semis 3-2. So I know I talked about it on multiple episodes, at least 2, since Major 5, where I was saying, 5-5 map count, 1-1 series count between these two teams. It was really as close as it could be between them. That's when we were kind of having that debate about, Minnesota came in 3rd, Toronto came in 4th, but Toronto was probably the better team, all that, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. But obviously, seeing that, I was really excited to see these two teams play again. And if you told me these two teams were going to play again twice at Champs, I probably wouldn't have said that it would have been 2 sweeps, just especially based on the fact it was 2 Game 5 series the last time they played at Major 5. So the fact that it was not, the fact they played each other again twice in the tournament doesn't surprise me. But the fact that it was 2 sweeps definitely just stood out. But once again, it was a similar situation. Ultra win in the winners bracket at Champs, knock Subliners down to losers, and then Subliners come through losers to win the whole thing. Obviously, not as much of a losers bracket run for New York this time, as opposed to at Major 5, where they literally came from losers bracket round 1 all the way to winning the chip. But still very impressive, and I think the best way we can tee it up before actually diving straight into the match, after that ultra sweep of New York in the winners bracket finals, the 2023 Rookie of the Year Scrappy decided to let New York, in particular the 3 players who aren't Hydra, let him know what he thinks about them, and Subliners responded.
Yeah, he said team's pretty ass, which was a good
outside of Hydra.
Yeah, he said he shut down Hydra, but the team is pretty ass. And he said that after winners finals, so Toronto had locked up their grand final spot. New York still had some work to do. They had to play Atlanta FaZe, who had made a pretty strong losers bracket run to that point. I mean, it's what got Scrappy here, right? He's ultra, no pun intended, but he's a very, very confident guy, and some would even say arrogant or cocky, whatever. Like, he's one of the best players in the CDL. He was first team all-star, Rookie of the Year. We should mention that he did win Rookie of the Year. We could, I guess, point out those awards later in the show, but he's great. He's a great player. It's also just kind of a difference in personality. Some players choose to talk crap or whatever before it happens because they're just so confident that it's going to happen, and some wait to win or have that kind of triumph to do it. And Scrappy in particular said that I'm gonna talk now, and it just didn't work out for him in this case because New York, in a complete kind of switch from winners finals, they were as good as I've seen them this year. They led up Toronto on the first 3 maps were just like steamrolling. The last 2 maps were pretty close. Toronto seemed to get their footing a little bit. It was pretty winnable, both Hotel Hardpoint and Embassy Search 4 and 5 in that series. Those were pretty winnable maps for Toronto, but those first 3 were ridiculously one-sided. And I think this has been the story pretty much of like that series, was that KiSMET in particular took offense to Scrappy's post-game comments after the winners finals. And he said in a press conference, I believe after that loss, he said, I'm going to smoke him. Or was that after Champs or after?
It was after they beat FaZe.
Oh, yeah. So
right before they went to grand finals.
Yeah, so it was the end of Saturday press conference, and KiSMET said, I'm going to smoke him tomorrow. Because he said it was disrespectful. He didn't, obviously. I don't think anybody likes to be called ass and kind of be put down, especially because those 2 teams are been playing some of the best Call of Duty at the end of the season, and KiSMET lit it up 25-10 on Hydro Hardpoint. He was all over the map. Skies also was incredible, 28-13. Search was again Skies and KiSMET really was dominating the game. Hydra also had a very strong game as well. KiSMET went 7-3 that map. And Greenberg Hotel Control was a Hydra game, 28-17. KiSMET had 21, Skies 19, and I didn't think they would end up sweeping even at this point. Like, they're up 3-0. A lot of times you see this happen where teams will come out red hot in 2 to 3 maps, especially like in a grand final, and they'll start to cool off. They'll hit one of their respawns that don't work, or a search that is in favor of the other team. But New York just kind of seemed to figure it out. You predicted you know, like you had already won Pick'em at this point, so you were just like, I'm gonna pick New York for this series, even though you picked Toronto, I think, in winners finals to beat New York. So your prediction, like your real prediction, would probably been Toronto wins this series if like you got to see the map vetoes or you got to see what maps were in the series. So after seeing that, would you have still picked Toronto, or were you favoring New York after the Subliners beat FaZe in the losers bracket?
I think I was favoring New York after the KiSMET stuff dropped. Like that was kind of like, I bought into that storyline, how cool it was, kind of, it didn't turn out that way, but like early in the season when we had Fellow versus Ghosty, the father-son matchup there, I kind of, bought into that, and didn't work out for me there, but, here I thought that was really cool, and I obviously would have really liked to see KiSMET. I like Scrappy. I've talked about him multiple times on the pod now. It kind of feels like he's trying to be the next Aches, the next villain. And one thing, for as much as I like Aches, there's definitely been times where the trash tech has come back to bite him, and one time in particular it sticks out was, I think it would have been CWL Seattle 2018. I think that's right, because it was World War II. It was like the first event for EG after they made like all their roster changes to get Assault and Silly. And they made it to the grand finals. Rise Nation with Slasher goes on this wild loser bracket run from first round of loser bracket, I believe. And they had to win 2 best of 5s against Aches and EG, and obviously, there's a little banter between Aches and Slasher, as always, between those two, and Slasher won 2 best of 5s to take the whole thing from a loser bracket run against Aches. So, that's what kind of came to mind here for me in this situation after it all played out, obviously. But yeah, I think the one thing that stuck out to me when we were going through this tournament is obviously getting a little bit away from the grand finals here, but New York's first match was a really tough one in comparison to what a lot of people probably expected. Against Minnesota, they had to reverse sweep. They lost the first 2 maps against Minnesota, and that's how they if they don't reverse sweep, they're down in loser bracket round 1 again. So that was kind of where my head was at the time for the pick'em, where it was like New York, had that more tough match. Ultra obviously had a really close match against the Thieves in the first round, but then they beat FaZe, so I was kind of like, Ultra beating FaZe, they're firing all cylinders. I gotta go with them here. But then, once again, New York is able to beat FaZe, and you can't really, both teams in the grand finals end up beating FaZe, so can't really use that as a metric at that point anymore. So I definitely wasn't expecting a 5-0 either way in the grand finals, but yeah, going in, I just think that the narrative was definitely super cool, and it would have been cool either way, right? Like if Toronto ended up winning and Scrappy was up there just talking his shit after getting that ring in his rookie year, like that would have been cool too. But the KiSMET storyline, and then being super humble in the post game interview, I'm sure everybody would have loved to hear him just go absolutely off. But he kept it clean, and was humble after winning it all, and winning Champs MVP. So it was just probably not like the fireworks some people would have liked to see out of that, but that was a really cool narrative that obviously kind of developed just naturally at the end of the tournament. Like going into the tournament, nobody really would have expected that drama in particular, but it was definitely exciting the way it played out.
Yeah, I appreciate Scrappy giving us that content and something to talk about, because there isn't really a ton of rivalries in the CDL. There are some players that don't get along, and there's like a CDL versus Draza feud going on, like, but other than that, there's not a whole lot to build on the rivalries and in that like in this league. But Scrappy, he's kind of a fire starter almost. He he just kind of, wherever he goes, he attracts some attention and some drama, and that's great for the league. I really appreciate it. Like this series it's so weird. I think Scrappy kind of, like, I'm not gonna give anybody excuses, but I think it is apt to say that they played their worst Call of Duty probably of the season in the grand finals. I don't think even New York, like, there was a less than 24-hour difference between Toronto 3-0ing New York and then New York 5-0ing Toronto. I don't think that New York got so much better in those 24 hours, and I don't think Toronto got that much worse. Like, I think in general, it's more just sometimes you have really good games, you have really good series, and sometimes you don't. And it happened to be that New York had a really good series at the same time that Toronto had a very bad series. How much you can really say is like New York caused that versus Toronto just played poorly by themselves. It's pretty difficult because I look at the winners finals. They played Hydro map 1, 250 to 186 for Toronto. CleanX drops 33. KiSMET 17 and 26. Hydra had 33 kills as well, but a pretty convincing win on Hydro in map 1 of the winners finals. They played Hydro for map 1 of the grand finals as well. It was a 250 to 84 win for New York. CleanX, who dropped 33 in the other Hydro hardpoint, went 10 and 25, a 0.4 KD, while you had Hydra 22 and 17, KiSMET 25 and 10, Skies 28 and 13. Priesta only had 22 engagements in that map. That, like, everybody else on his team had 22 or more kills, which kind of shows that how dominant they were in that hard point, that he literally didn't need to shoot his gun a ton to really get that win. They didn't play any other similar maps between the winners finals and grand finals. Granted, winners finals was only 3 maps, but I just think that Toronto played their worst COD of the season probably, while New York was playing at the best that I've seen them, and it made me feel good because the last episode, or maybe 2 episodes ago now, I can't remember, I talked about KiSMET in particular, saying, like, I think, like, he's an unsung hero of this team because Hydra will always get the praise, and deservedly so, right? Because he's the MVP of the league. He won CDL regular season MVP this weekend officially, and Skies is an incredible player who drops a ton of kills. He's very, very talented. But KiSMET is kind of the glue that holds it all together. Like, without that second guy, another guy alongside them, I think it's very difficult for them to win titles. And they won 3 events this year, with Champs being the 3rd. That's really impressive. And I don't want to overlook Priesta, because the role of the 4th guy, the guy that doesn't put up stats, especially considering we've seen Priesta, like, back in Black Ops 4, and in past years, where he does put up the stats and he's an incredible player. I think last year was probably one of his worst seasons as a pro with Minnesota, and that led him to New York. But he played his role perfectly. It was, I'm in an NBA mood because the finals just ended, but I think of it like Aaron Gordon or like Bruce Brown or somebody. Like, they're not going to get as much credit as Jokic or Murray, but, like, they are so instrumental in that title run. Like, you can't replace them. Like, if you tried to just replace them with a mediocre player, it's not going to work. So everybody on New York's side has to be very proud. They should be very proud of the work they've done. And that brings me to kind of the turnaround, because this is something that we had discussed at the end of last season. There was a ton of drama around the New York Subliners. They had that incredible run at Major 4, Major 5, whatever the last major was. They made it out of the bottom 4. They got to Champs with a 2nd place finish, It was an incredible story for the Subliners to even make champs, considering how far back they were at one point in the season. And at the end of the year, after champs, we find out that they had so much drama going on. It's a miracle that they were able to do what they did when they were dealing with all of these problems. Particularly between like Crim6 and Paul X and Hydra. Hydra was kind of at the center of the controversy. It was like he's kind of like being treated differently. He's kind of treated like a kid. He's not, held accountable by coaches and whatnot, among other things. But for that to happen, less than 12 months ago, because that was probably in August or September last year, and now we're sitting here in June 2023, and Hydra and KiSMET, they've made it. They've become world champions. They are at the very, very top of Call of Duty, and the New York Subliners are as well. I don't know if you have any input or any kind of input on that specifically, because I just think it's pretty incredible that a team could completely do a 180 within a year and win champs and 2 majors, which is, just an incredible year all around.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and watch the episode of The Flank or anything like that from over a year ago, or it would be less than a year ago because last season ended in August, but regardless, I feel like a lot of people would be very surprised. You see the roster changes, especially a legendary player like Crim6 leaving the team. Regardless of the outside of the server drama, Crim6 still arguably one of the best players. Well, not even arguably, he is one of the best Call of Duty players, and in some people's minds, he is the #1 best COD player of all time. So losing a guy like that, no matter what you think about his like current performance or anything like that, is definitely tough. So just that on top of all this other stuff happening outside of the actual game, definitely, you tell me they're lifting 3 trophies and they get everything at the end of the year this year, regardless of who's on that roster. It's pretty surprising to me. I think it goes to I would really like to talk to somebody like D-Real, obviously Hydra. They did multiple post-game interviews with him, and obviously English isn't his first language, and he you can tell when he does an interview, he doesn't really like being interviewed, and maybe it's because it's in English, and he would be better if he was doing it in French and somebody was translating for him. But regardless of that, I feel like he wouldn't be the best person to interview with somebody like D-Real, or maybe even Sender, even though Sender wasn't there last year. But somebody with a good behind-the-scenes perspective of just what's different. I mean, even KiSMET, because KiSMET was there for the end of last year. It would be cool to talk to somebody like that who could give insight into what they really think is the biggest difference outside of the player changes and stuff like that. Like, what did they try to do to actively avoid a scenario where it was similar this season? And there was stuff in the off season with like Skies playing Valorant with Hydra and stuff. Maybe it's just a case where this team just got along better. Without talking to anybody behind the scenes or involved with New York, we might not never know. But it's really cool to see a turnaround like that. And I think Hydra, since Hydra joined the league, we've seen his potential. Just to see where he is now and actually be like the MVP. Like you could have at certain moments, even when he first joined the league, like he had flashes of brilliance, but it was still getting acclimated to being in a whole new country, being in trying to communicate a new language, all the multiple obstacles. And I mean, I feel like I obviously haven't done it, but if you went back and did a listen in from like the end of the Cold War season compared to now, I feel like his English is super just improved since then, and that could obviously be a big factor in helping in terms of communications, call outs, all that stuff. So I feel like they talked about it on the broadcast a little bit. Like, I don't remember exactly what was said, but I feel like they were just saying like he's been working on his English and stuff. So I think in game, out of game, just in multiple ways. It seems New York, Hydra, and everybody was putting in a ton of work, and it's nice in my opinion to see them rewarded. Obviously, everybody's trying to win at the end of the day, but you can only have one team hoist that trophy when it's all said and done. So, it's definitely, especially in comparison to the whirlwind season they had last year. It's got to feel good for those New York guys. And we even talked about it on one of the shows since Major 5 too. I know I brought it up. Literally Major 2 this year, they had that massive travel fiasco with the airlines in Texas being delayed or whatever, going to Boston, and New York had a bad placing. They lost their luggage, and all this chaos ensued that obviously you can't just blame their performance on the major solely on that outside factor. But when New York won Major 1, then get last place, or maybe they got top 8, I don't even remember, at Major 2, you kind of have to scratch your head and think it played some factor in it. And especially now when you see them they win Major 5 and win champs, I definitely think that Major 2 and Major 3 were probably more of an outlier for New York than potentially the other way around, where if you said after Major 3, New York I think they won Major, well, I know they won Major 1, I think it was top 12 Major 2 and then top 8 Major 3, or maybe it was vice versa there, but then obviously Major 4 they got 4th, because I remember talking about how it felt like they were kind of getting closer back to their Major 1 form, and then first to end the year there. So I think now that we have the whole picture to look at, you can definitely say those second and third events were more of an anomaly as opposed to what you could expect from New York, or you should have expected at least.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on New York, and we can move to another team and kind of talk about, I'd want to give the champs their props, and we've talked about them for probably 15, 20 minutes at this point. But I also want to talk about some of these other teams. But before I do that, I was going to tweet it, but I didn't think I could word it correctly in 280 characters. But to think about the different paths that these subliners players, took to get to the World Championship. This is the first World Championship for each of these 4 players. But Hydra was the French phenom, the guy that everybody wanted, everybody believed would be the next Simp or something along those lines. But we didn't really know exactly when that was going to be. He spent the first year on the academy team, or the first part of the year with the academy team, then got called up. And then he showed, flashes of brilliance. He was definitely a very good player. But like you alluded to, the communication issues, just getting used to a new country in general had to be a very terrifying and very tough experience for an 18, 19-year-old. I couldn't imagine doing that at 18 or 19. And he improved, but we had the drama last year after the season, and it just seemed to kind of be okay, what is next for this guy? And now he's the first European player to win a world championship, aside from Tommy, who was a substitute with the Dallas Empire in 2020. But he's the first starter, I'll say, to win a world championship from Europe. And I think he has a very legitimate case now to be the greatest European player of all time. I saw some people making that argument. I think his peak is obviously way higher than any other player. It's just the longevity now of kind of continuing that. But he's at the top now, and I just think about his journey. If you look at Priesta's journey, Priesta he's always been a very, very good player. He was with that 100 Thieves team. He's with Atlanta FaZe for that first CDL season with Minnesota RØKKR. He's been around the CDL at this point, and last year, like I said earlier, was his low point. He didn't look like the same player that he previously was, and I think that there's a legitimate case that he wouldn't have been in the CDL next year had that trend continued, because it seemed like he was going from very a great to a very good team to a worse team to a worse team, and at a certain point you stop getting those chances. And he had been in the grand finals of champs twice and came in second twice. He's silver surfing, as we like to say, and now he has a world championship, and his career will probably be looked at very differently now that he has that ring instead of 2 second places and some other good results. Skies was with the Florida Mutineers until this season in the CDL, and I don't think the talent was ever the issue for Skies, because we saw when Florida was really good in 2020, where they won a few home series events, Skies was one of the best players, and you could make the case that he was like at some point the best AR in the league, maybe for a little bit, or one of the very best. But they kept coming up short. Florida, I think, got top 8 at both champs, maybe 2020 and 2021, and I don't think they made it last year for the 2022 champs. So like he was individually very good, but the team success, especially at the highest level, he couldn't get there. And now he teams up with his Val pal Hydra, and people had a lot to say about that last year because they were friends, and I guess that's somehow a bad thing. Like any other CDL pros don't team up with their friends, but now he's a world champion, and again, like his career is looked at differently because he had kind of fallen short at these previous stops, and now he hasn't. He's at the top, and he was incredible for this run. He was so good. And then finally, KiSMET. Like the Bulldog is incredible. I mean, it's legendary that he did what he did, saying I'm going to smoke him tomorrow. And then he did smoke him. He 5-0'd, first, sweep that was longer than a best of 5. To win 5 straight maps is pretty ridiculous. I think, unfortunately, Toronto is now the first team to get reverse swept in a best of 9 and also get swept in a best of 9, which is not great history, but still you're making history. But KiSMET literally was a second option. He was the backup plan for New York last year. Crimsix said they tried and tried and tried to get Hixie on New York last year when they were making their roster changes mid-season, but they couldn't get Hixie because he was under Ultra contract, and they couldn't get the buyout. They couldn't get him to New York, so they kind of settled for KiSMET. And then KiSMET, I think Crimsix put it best. He's like, KiSMET got blessed, and then he blessed us by just being the incredible player that we know him now to be, a great glue player, and he's now a CDL Champs MVP, and deservedly so. He was just absolutely dominant. He was like wreaking havoc on Toronto in this series, to the point like you could probably feel the frustration from the Ultra players of like spawn in, run a little bit, and then like KiSMET shoots you in the back, and then like spawn in again and he shoots you from the front. And that's just kind of how the series went for them. So I just think about those paths and how they all got together and they won a world championship together, because it just seems so improbable, especially like I said, looking back a year ago or less than a year ago, when everything seemed to be in disarray with the Subliners franchise. So congratulations to NYSL, very well deserved. One of the most dominant performances I've seen in the CDL in quite some time. One of the I haven't watched the Complexity Envy series from 2014 in a long time. I don't remember whether this is more dominant or less dominant, but it's got to be, just by being the second sweep in Grand Finals history, it's got to be one of the most dominant. And just another congratulations to New York.
I just want to throw in real quick, and then we can move on. I was looking because I knew I interviewed KiSMET, when he like kind of broke out onto the scene. I don't even want to think breaking out is the right term for when it happened, but it was at CWL Anaheim 2018. It was the Conquest team. It was KiSMET, Timmy Phantoms, Tish, and Gravity, Tom Gravity, and they made pool play at CWL Anaheim, and that was June 17th, 2018. So literally 5 years was like, I mean, you look, he competed at CWL, Seattle, CWL Atlanta, but he got top 32 at Atlanta, top 40 at Seattle, so top 24. Back in those days, I'm pretty sure that means that was like the first time he made pool play, and there's been multiple definitions of what is pro point. And obviously, with the CWL, I probably wouldn't consider it a pro placing there. But I was looking, and I found that I did the interview almost exactly 5 years ago. To this champ, so that just means within 5 years, KiSMET has gone from being an open bracket player to hoisting a world championship. And obviously, there's multiple bumps and trials and tribulations along the way, but it was pretty cool to go back and look and see that. And like you said, there's multiple stories for everybody involved in this team. So really cool story for all those guys. And like you said, congratulations.
Yeah, Andy was part of that Paris Legion roster, the first
Yep.
one. And none of those guys ever got back to the CDL as players. Denz and Zed are, coaching and general manager of the Boston Breach, but Shox and Luca never got back to the CDL. And there have been a lot of players that were in KiSMET's position of, being on a bad CDL team, and they just never got back to this league. Like, they just stayed in challengers or retired. And I'm really happy for him. I think it's a great story that he built himself back up, and now he's a world champion. Let's talk about Toronto just a little bit more. We could talk about like their run in general, because we have talked about their grand finals and their winners finals, but they beat Atlanta FaZe in winners bracket semifinals after beating LAT in the first round. Toronto LAT was what we said was probably the must-see match from winners round one, because they were the 4-5 seeds, and they seemed just a really tough matchup for each other, and that proved to be the case. Toronto ended up winning that series 3-2, and it was, a very difficult series for both of those teams. LAT dropped the first hard point and then won the search. LAT took a 2-1 lead on control and then lost Fortress hardpoint and then Embassy search to finish out that series. As a whole, Scrappy was the only Ultra player from that series to finish with a positive KD. Hixie had a .65 KD, and they still won. He went 62 and 96. And Scrappy had a 1.15 and ended up winning that series. And Toronto in general just... They just, like, it's kind of what we said at Major 5. Like, they looked so strong. They were obviously one of the very best teams at this tournament, and you could really see that as soon as the FaZe series started. It seemed to be like, okay, like, FaZe might be in trouble here, and they were. Toronto ended up winning that 3-1. Any, like, kind of final thoughts or general thoughts on Toronto, because they've now finished second at Champs twice. They lost to FaZe in 2021, had a relatively down year last year, and won a major this year, but ultimately fell just a little bit short at Champs again. Any thoughts on the Ultra?
I mean, look, I kind of said it earlier, and only one team can hoist the trophy at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
obviously somebody has to be the team to lose in the grand final. So obviously, in the history books now, you're going to see Toronto having lost in multiple champs finals, but they still definitely, they have so much young talent on that team. Even, I'm pretty sure I was looking it up over the weekend because they were talking about Kleenex. It might have been the first Hydro between New York and Subliners when Toronto won. They were talking about Kleenex on the Scump watch party, and I think the Scump was like, "How old is he?" And I'm pretty sure Method said 22, which, I mean, like, you think about Kleenex, like, it feels like he's been doing it for a while now, and he's still super young. So, like, and Insight's pretty young, I believe, and obviously Scrappy and Hixie are both just finished their rookie years. So, I'm going to be really interested to see what this team does in the offseason. Obviously, we're not going to get too into that, but because Hixie and Scrappy were both, like, substitutes for this team last year. They could, if they were technically on 1+1s, they could be unrestricted free agents. So the contract situation between, and then obviously, Insight, well, Kleenex in particular, has been on Toronto the entire time. Insight since the second season of the CDL. So I don't really know what exactly their contract situations are, but I'm definitely interested to see how it plays out. Obviously, Scrappy just won Rookie of the Year. It'd be really shocking if they let him leave the building and didn't, keep him around. But yeah, I think we'll be talking about that a little more in depth. But they played well up until the final series. It just sucks that, for them at least, that it, like you said, it was the biggest match of the year where they just had their worst showing. You can make the argument it might have been their worst play. I would probably counter with those online matches after winning Major 3, so the Major 4 qualifiers is, they go 0-5 there. I guess that's pretty similar to losing 5 maps here, but losing on LAN probably trumps losing on online qualifiers. So, tit for tat, whatever you want to say there, it could go either way. But I think there's a lot of potential on this Toronto team, and I'm interested to see how they'll what they'll decide to do with the roster heading into next year, and what form they're in. Because I could see this squad sticking. One thing you were mentioning Hicksy's statistical performance, and we were talking about that in the Twitter group chat a little bit too over the weekend. It's just Hicksy's role and job on the team is definitely goes beyond the numbers. We kind of talked about that since he was picked up by the team. Standy had like over a 1 KD when he was on Toronto, so obviously they bring Hicksy in, and he has a lower KD than what Standy did, but Toronto sees more success with him. So I think that's just in itself just speaks to Toronto having more faith in the way they play as a unit with Hicksy on the squad. So could see this going multiple directions. Could see them trying to upgrade at that second submachine gun role. Could see them sticking as a 4-man unit, but regardless of all of that, it's definitely a good way to end the season for Toronto. Despite the actual end result, second place, they still walk away with a solid payday, and especially with how young these guys are, a lot of potential for them to potentially be on the other side of history in the years to come.
A team that has been on the other side of history before, Atlanta FaZe. They entered this tournament having been a part of each of the first 3 CDL Champs Grand Finals. Simp had never not been in the Champs Grand Finals in his career. He won in 2019 with E United, lost in 2020, won in 2021 with FaZe, and then last year lost to LAT in the Grand Finals. But this year, Atlanta FaZe fell short, finishing in 3rd, losing in the losers finals to the New York Subliners. Pretty tough experience for FaZe this year, because they did look so good when they won the major. They kind of broke out of the Silver Surfer role that they played all throughout last season. I believe all but one of the majors, and at Champs they finished in 2nd, and they of course they finished 1st in the regular season standings. I think that's 4 straight seasons that they've done so. So the consistency has never been a real issue in terms of the overall kind of grand scheme of it, but they fell short again. They lost to Toronto and New York, so the 2 grand finalists are the 2 teams that they lost to at this event, and all 5 of their series at this event were 3-1s, which is just kind of interesting, I guess. And I think I just wanted to bring up some of the map win stuff, or the mode win stuff. FaZe before Champs were just over 500 in hardpoint and a little bit over 500 in control, and overwhelmingly great in search and destroy, 46-19 on the season. At Champs, FaZe was 7-3 in hardpoint, so a 70% win percentage in hardpoint, which is, a 20% increase from the regular season. Of course, smaller sample size. They were 1-4 in control, so a 20% win percentage in control, and they were 3-2 in search, which is 60%, which I would imagine is around their average. It's probably a little bit below if I had to guess. So Hardpoint, a massive improvement, at least, just from the results of that. Control, a lot of regression, I guess. And search, maybe a slight decrease, but nothing gigantic there. Do those numbers jump out to you at all? What did you kind of see throughout the weekend? Because we've always been kind of not pro FaZe, but just like we have eyes and we know that they're a very good team and have been for 4 years. But we also seen for the first time, really, in these past 2 seasons, they were kind of vulnerable at times. They seemed to be kind of weak in some areas. So what did you see at Champs, and what did you think of FaZe's performance at Champs?
Yeah, I really don't have a solid answer there. It's one of those where they end up losing to the 2 grand finalists, and the teams they beat Seattle twice and Boston, which despite we talked about it a couple times, the history between FaZe and Seattle, you still expect them to take care of business against the Surge. So it's not like we got to see a FaZe OpTic showdown again, and FaZe finally was able to flip the script on that matchup that's not been in their favor this past year. It was really a case where they beat all the teams you expect them to, and then they lost to the grand finalists. And it's really, looking at the modes and stuff, like their control wasn't great this event. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, they lost 3-0 to Seattle, so that was the one map they lost there. They lost 3-1 to Boston. That was the one map they lost in that series of control. That 250 to 248 game 4 against Boston was pretty nutty ending on Ricardo, but and then they turn things around with a 3-0 winning control against Surge the second time, but they lose a 6-5 search and destroy. And then obviously against New York, they end up losing maps 2, 3, 4 after winning map 1. So it really doesn't, outside of maybe, you look at the control as an issue in particular, but obviously, and then I skipped the winners bracket matchup with Toronto. They only won the search, so they lost all 3 respawns there. So I feel like, obviously control is only one map in a best of 5, so it's a little tougher to say like control was the reason for their downfall, and I don't think that's necessarily true, but it obviously doesn't help when you're struggling in one mode in particular. But it's not like they were really struggling in hardpoint or really struggling in search at this event in particular. I'm trying to do quick math in my head, but it's not working. I don't know. I think they were probably around even on most in the hardpoint and search, and then control was like probably 1-4. But yeah, I just think it obviously is weird to think, especially after how they looked at certain points this year, that the storyline of Simp missing a grand finals of Champs for the first time, still pretty ludicrous to just think that third is technically his quote-unquote worst placing at Champs. But yeah, I think another case here where didn't go FaZe's way, and be really interesting to see what happens in the off season. I have a lot of ideas for what FaZe could potentially do, and I think some might be a little unorthodox, but not necessarily if you paid attention to some of the rumors that came out earlier this year. So will be interesting to see what FaZe decides to do.
Yeah, and we'll jump into all of the RosterMania stuff, give our thoughts. Maybe we'll even get some news, but we'll talk about it next week, because we just have so much champ stuff that it's so hard. Unless we did like a 3-hour show, we really wouldn't be able to get to it all. The only thing I really have to say on FaZe is the difference between this year and last year. It's pretty big. The hard points, they got worse in hard point. They were 52 and 36 last year. They were 47 and 42 this year. Search and destroy, they were much better. So Search wins championships, not quite, but they were still very good. They went 38 and 33 last season in Search and Destroy. They were 49 and 21 this season. So just a massive improvement in that game mode. And Control, I think they were one of the best Control teams in the league last year. They went 35 and 19, and they were exactly 500 this season. So 27 and 27. The respawns, as you can tell, got worse and Search got better. I remember it was Tupac. When Tupac came in, he was obviously there. He's obviously there to address Search. And they've done that. And I think that's really good. They've shored up one of the hardest game modes to do that. But at the same time, I don't know if it's like, there's any correlation, but they've gone away from being one of the best respawn teams in the game. And now they're just kind of a mediocre respawn team. I compared them a lot to the Vegas Legion this year. And they're a much better version of the Vegas Legion for sure. But the idea is the same. They're, specifically in Control, they're much better than Vegas is. But respawn is kind of hit or miss. There's a chance that they lose respawns to really anybody. Like they could drop a hard point or they could drop a Control to any team essentially. Search, they're a little more certain in, but unless you're a 100% Search team, you're going to lose them eventually. And if you also lose your first hard point in your Control, it could be over a 3-0 sweep, or you're just going to have a very, very hard time getting those series. So I'm not sure exactly how to address those things about improving respawn while maintaining this level of success in Search. But maybe that's a roster change move. Maybe it's a coaching thing. They have one of the best coaching staffs in the league, at least in my opinion. Crowder was an incredible player, and I think he's a very good coach. The results seem to point to that. Easy Mac is a very good analyst. I think he's one of the brighter guys, statistically, literally statistically, in the CDL. And then you obviously have RJ. I'm not sure exactly how they all fit together. And then there's, of course, Tupac. So they have an extensive coaching staff, especially for Call of Duty. And I don't know what really needs to change in that or what needs to be added, but it's definitely something that we'll talk about throughout the offseason to kind of figure out where FaZe needs to go to get back to where they've been, or they were just 2 years ago. Let's talk about Seattle, a team that I did not have a lot of faith in coming into this event. At one time, I was T1 Seattle Surge supporter, and they whittled down my passion for the team through a lot of really bad performances, nearly missing out on champs at Major 5. They got first rounded at Major 5, and they came in as the number 8 seed coming into champs, playing Atlanta FaZe. They lose to FaZe 3-1. Not a huge surprise there. They lost the search, they won the search, which was probably the most surprising part about it, and then lost the respawns to FaZe. But still, they lost to FaZe, so nothing of note there. And then Seattle goes on a pretty brief loser bracket run, all things considered, because it's only an 8-team tournament. But they ended up beating 2 of the 3 most popular teams in the league. They eliminate the Los Angeles Thieves in losers round 1. and then they eliminate OpTic Texas in losers round 2. Two of the best teams in the league, two of the title favorites. Even though LAT and OpTic have had kind of their low moments, but both of those teams have the capability to win at the highest level, and Seattle knocks them both out in Game 5 in each of those series. The OpTic Pred stuff was kind of looming over that OpTic series in particular, but the potential that Seattle, like everybody knew that Seattle had potential at some point in the season, whether it was Major 1 or maybe it was another certain point in the season, but everybody saw the potential that the Surge had dating back to last year, and they kind of showed it at this event. Of course, they didn't get to where they wanted to. They ended up finishing 4th, which is slightly lower than they got last season at Champs. But to go from the 8th best team in the regular season to a 4th place finish, knocking out 2 teams above you, that's something that should be lauded. What did you think of Seattle and their performance this weekend by knocking out OpTic and LAT?
Obviously, I think it was better than a lot of people anticipated. There were probably multiple people who were expecting them to get double first rounded just based on the matchups, in particular with FaZe, and then whether they played Ultra or the Thieves in the loser bracket round 1 after that. You probably have them as the underdog heading into the event in both of those cases.
Yeah, for sure.
But they showed that this squad has potential, and that's never been a question with Seattle. It's always been, we've talked about the seesaw, the roller coaster, whatever analogy you want to use. It's just been an up and down stretch for this team where they have high highs, including at a major championship last year. They also have low lows with the last place finish most recently at Major 5, right? So, gonna be interesting again. I feel like a little bit of a broken record, but obviously with the OpTic Pred rumors, regardless of where Pred is playing next year, there's definitely going to be a lot of eyes on this Seattle team in terms of what the squad does moving forward and what their roster looks like. But I think even Sib, obviously he had the incredible 1v3 to eliminate OpTic from the tournament. But, Sib and Pred have kind of been that duo since Seattle, turned things around as a franchise. Is there a world where they find their way onto another team as a team of 2, or is it really just going to be OpTic Pred and then maybe Seattle tries to build around Sib, or maybe it's a complete just blow it up job and they have to build from scratch again, which, they have Revan as GM now, so a lot of questions for Seattle. I think obviously all things considered, though, 4th place, they definitely, if you told them with their recent performance at Major 5 they were going to get 4th place at Champs, they probably would be like, yeah, sign us up for that. But the talent's never been the problem or the question with this team. It's just always been, when they're able to put it together, what form they're in, all that stuff. And obviously they were able to showcase a little of that this weekend to, get a decent payday out of it. But I think this is going to be one of the teams, especially with those brand names and Pred and Sid, where a lot of RosterMania eyes are going to be on them this offseason.
Yeah, and I think we have to just give a shout out to Equip. Trem was our lead Ego Chall correspondent. He was in the group chat, and so were you, saying that Equip's cooking something up when we were going to Game 5 against OpTic. Because we talked about it a lot this year, but Seattle was a 33% win percentage in search heading into Champs, and they ended up going 4-2 at Champs in search. It was actually their best game mode, which kind of, they got their best result that they probably could at this point in the year. But yeah, it's credit to those guys, because they were one of the worst, if not the worst, search team all year, and to kind of turn around and knock out 2 of the biggest teams in the process. And the only team they really lost to at this event was FaZe. They lost to them twice, 3-1. And there's really not a lot of shame in losing to FaZe. I do believe that FaZe knocked them out both years now at Champs, if I'm not mistaken. I think FaZe was in the losers bracket last year and knocked them out in losers finals, if I remember correctly. Right. But just again, no shame in losing to FaZe, really.
Yeah, and I mean, going the equip thing too. The bigger thing there was Seattle was 0-5 on Mercado S&D this season, heading into a Game 5 against OpTic. So they were literally winless on the map that was the do or die map for their entire season, and they were able to win that. I think that definitely shout out to Equip. Obviously, without actually talking to him, it's hard to know exactly how much of an impact he has on the search and destroy, but especially in that OpTic series in particular, Seattle won 2 searches in against OpTic. They went 2-4-5 to win it, and they won both searches 6-4, so it was a 6-2, sorry, so it was a 12-4 round count for Seattle in that one. So yeah, like I said, just goes. They have the talent, especially in the respawns. They have the slaying potential. Didn't feel like there were a lot of Iceman clutch moments. So this year, I think maybe it was there one in. There was something this weekend. I feel like I remember.
I can't remember if it was in LATs. It was, I think, either Game 5 LAT or one of the searches for OpTic, but he had just
outside of that there was not as much as comparison to in Vanguard, where we saw multiple ninja diffuses and people doing the Jesse Pinkman gift. You can't keep getting away with this. So
that's how I was.
I think like we said, now Seattle has that potential, has the talent, and I think I mean at this point I don't think it's super outlandish to just say it was a little surprising to see them run the exact same lineup out this past season from the Vanguard year. We talked about maybe them doing like a one-player swap, trying to go for an AR change potentially, but to say that they are most likely not going to have the same roster going into the 2024 season, I do not think is an outlandish statement.
Yeah. Also, they, like you said, they were winless on Mercado this season until Game 5 against OpTic. And they also had lost all of their searches to LAT until Game 5 Fortress S&D, and they ended up winning that. So whatever Equip and Phoenix and the Seattle boys were cooking, they were cooking with gas, I guess, because it's kind of ridiculous that they ended up here. We've gone long, but we definitely have to talk about at least 2 teams, at least just a little bit. OpTic Texas, who we've mentioned more recently because they lost the Seattle Surge. They lost to the Seattle Surge twice in S&D, got knocked out in top 6. They tied in placing with the Boston Breach, which credit to the Breach, but not a great showing, especially since OpTic actually played the Breach in round 1 of this tournament, and didn't have like the easiest time with them. OpTic, what was it, like a month ago that I said they were probably the best team in the game? They looked like unbeatable at that point. Went 5-0 in Major 4 qualifiers, 5-0 in Major 5 qualifiers, got to the grand finals of, I believe, 3 majors this year, but did not win a major. And at Champs, despite being the second seed or second or third, I don't know, like they were tied for second coming in, they just didn't show up when it really mattered. They beat Boston, which we all expected them to, unless something crazy happened with Snoopy, and he did have a good performance against OpTic, but we expected them to beat the Breach. They did. They won 3-1. Then they went to winners round 2, lost 3-1 to New York. Again, no real shame in losing to New York, especially when that team ends up winning the world championship, and they did it in a pretty dominating way, at least in the grand finals. But then OpTic loses 3-2 to Seattle, and this is the one that kind of not bugs me because I don't really care about OpTic's like performance. I'm not like emotionally invested in OpTic's placings, but that's the one that would frustrate me as an OpTic fan. Losing both searches to the Seattle Surge, even, we're hyping up Equip and we're hyping up Seattle for doing something that they weren't supposed to do, but like it's on OpTic at that point, and especially it's going to be the big point of emphasis, and it's just one round in the grand scheme of things. But the 1v3 that Sib had was all credit to Sib, but like OpTic's got to be better than that. They gave him 3 1v1s, and that's like Coach Trim probably pulling his hair out at home, because there's no reason. Like maybe the first death, I think that one is like understandable. You don't really know where he is. He gets the first kill, but the Dashy kill was really bad, and it just put Ghosty in a horrible situation, 1v1, without knowing exactly where he was again, and he had to check bomb. It's just a real disaster class for OpTic in that search, and I'm just not sure. What did you think of them? Because they just collapsed, these last 3-4 weeks. Like they everything looked great until Toronto, and then it's just gone downhill since then. And I think probably a roster change is coming, because that cannot continue where you underperform that bad.
Yeah, look, I mean, heading into this tournament, I said OpTic were the biggest wild card, because we literally saw them within just the Major 5 stretch be the best team in the world in the online qualifiers, and then have a last place finish at the LAN without winning a single map at Major 5. So it was really a question mark of what OpTic was going to show up here. Obviously, they get that first round win against Boston with Snoopy making his debut, which, to Snoopy's credit, he did play pretty well this weekend in my eyes, especially all things considered, with his debut tournament being the biggest tournament of the year. But then you go to that OpTic series, and I was kind of going back and forth between the Flank and the Scump watch parties this weekend, trying to listen to both and get a perspective of what they were talking about. And Hex was on the Scump broadcast, and I think at one point saying like talking about Ghosty, and I forget what series it would have been in, but he was like, that boy's getting a raise next year. So will be interesting to see what happens with that if Ghosty's sticking around. Because I could see it going both ways. I could see them trying to keep him around as like a young up and comer, or they try to get an upgrade there in what they think could potentially be an upgrade with like maybe a veteran player or something. But regardless of that, going performance-wise, I think the real big one that could have been a game changer was that Hydro hardpoint against New York. I forget what the exact scoreline was. It was like 240 to 220 something on the P2 in the back after the first one, the one by the water. And OpTic had a lead. They let New York. You posted the screenshot in there, and I think it was KiSMET who like kind of snuck through mid map to get a break in the hard point, and New York pulled off a pretty improbable comeback there, all things considered. But it's tough to say what would have happened even if New York closed out that map, because in the New York series. Let me just look at the Boston series real quick. So OpTic didn't win a search this weekend. Is that right? They won 3-1 against Boston. Boston won the search. OpTic then plays New York. Oh no, they only won the search against New York. They lost the 3 respawns. And then they lost both searches to Seattle. So, I mean, you could say, especially if OpTic did win that Game 2 search against New York, if they're able to close out the Game 4 there, who knows what happens in Game 5, and this tournament could look entirely differently. But I think at that point, that aside, they lose to the eventual the winners finalist. The loss against Seattle, though, is just one that you probably, if you're in the OpTic camp, you expect to close that one out. I don't know the exact record, but I know Albagra Fortress Hardpoint has been a pretty good map. It's been a good map, I feel like, for both OpTic and Seattle this year. But I feel like OpTic, just when they were like firing on all cylinders and getting those second places in Major 3, Major 4, I feel like I think it would have been Major 3 where they had like a stretch of like a couple straight 100-point clubs, even against like FaZe. I think they played FaZe at one point, and they like almost 100-point clubbed them on Albagra Fortress Hardpoint. So that was a pretty good map. So for OpTic to go into that Seattle series, have a 2-1 lead going into Albagra Fortress, you probably expect OpTic to close that one out. And then you don't even have to go to a Game 5 search against Seattle, which still, as you noted, Seattle hasn't been particularly great at search this year. And even if it does go to that Game 5, you can maybe say OpTic is, able to squeak one out there. But yeah, obviously, we've said this multiple times throughout the year and in years past, anything but first is a disappointment to the green wall. I think building off of their last place finish at Major 5, top 6 here at Champs is, middle of the pack. It's in the bottom half with only 8 teams at the event. But yeah, it's just one of those, like, a question mark. It's a year OpTic doesn't win any championships. Despite, like you said at multiple times, looking like potentially, not even potentially, I don't think you could really argue that for stretches there, especially in the qualifiers, they definitely looked like the best team in the game. They just weren't able to translate that into championships. So I'll be interested to see what OpTic does in the offseason. Really interested to see if Karma sticks around to continue coaching, because kind of like, I don't remember what I said particularly when the news dropped of that, but obviously I have a lot of respect for Karma, and I think he's one of the smartest Call of Duty minds in the scene. So I think he could be a very good coach. And if he has like a full season with the team, it'll be interesting to see what he's able to do and what he's able to help the squad achieve. But yeah, like a lot of these teams, it's gonna be interesting to see what that first domino is in RosterMania and what kind of chain reactions it causes, who goes where. Obviously, the big rumor looming is OpTic Pred, but will that actually happen? Who knows? We're gonna have to wait and see.
Yeah, it's just another disappointing Champs performance for OpTic, which I wasn't really surprised by the stat, but I was a little surprised. The OpTic has only been in the grand finals of one Champs, and that's the one that they actually won in 2017. And they haven't, I think, gotten like maybe this is back-to-back top, outside of the top 3. So it's, if you look at OpTic, or real OpTic, including the Huntsman, it's just been a really disappointing performance after performance for at Champs for them, which I didn't know. I still don't know why that is, to be honest, because they've always had one of, if not the most talented team. But then you look at this year in particular and just think everything was going right until June essentially, and it just went out the window. So I would probably say that a roster change is coming for them. I wouldn't be surprised. The other team that we really need to talk about, I think we should mention, like, Minnesota RØKKR lost 3-2 to New York. I was very scared for New York in those first 2 maps, and then the Subliners kind of woke up, and it turned into the series that I thought it would be. NYSL win that 3-2. They end up winning the championship. No real disappointment there for Minnesota, other than kind of just a missed opportunity. Minnesota ended up losing 3-1 to the Boston Breach in losers round 1. So top 8 for Minnesota, still an improvement from last year where they didn't make champs. They had some ups and downs, some roster changes. I don't know what the future of the team holds, but a pretty interesting offseason, I'm sure, coming up for them. The other team that we're not really talking about, but should be given a shout out, the Boston Breach, did not finish top 8 like I was convinced they would. They ended up losing 3-1 to OpTic and then beating the Minnesota RØKKR 3-1, and then losing to the Atlanta FaZe 3-1. They lost to, I don't know if OpTic can be considered one of the best teams, but they lost to a potentially very good OpTic team, and they lost to FaZe. So again, no worries for them. But the other team that we really need to talk about, the LA Thieves, the defending world champions, the Major 3 champion or Major 4 champions, the one that did not have fans at it in Columbus. They ended up finishing, I believe, in the 5th spot in the standings because of a really bad Major 5 qualifier run, and then a less than stellar Major 5 run because they started in the losers bracket. But LAT started with the 5th seed. They played Toronto Ultra, went to Game 5, lost Game 5 to Toronto, dropped down to losers bracket to play the Seattle Surge, and they lose to the Seattle Surge 3-2. So 2 Game 5 losses for LAT at this event. They were the first team to be eliminated from this tournament after winning this same event last season. I mean, it's the same thing as OpTic, right? That this is a really disappointing performance. What are you saying?
I was just gonna. I think it's a little bit, I don't think unfair is the right word, but it's just a little different circumstances than OpTic because they literally won Major 4. And we're talking about comparing it to last year where it's, is LAT hitting their stride at the end of the season just like they did last year where they won Major 4 and then Champs. Obviously this year there was the additional Major at the end and they didn't have a great performance in those qualifiers or the Major there itself. So a little bit different there, but I think that's just the tail of the tape here for the Thieves. I mean, they didn't get blown out in these 2 series. They lost 2 hard-fought series to teams that came in 4th and 2nd. Just the way, the dice rolled for them, and they had a really tough first-round matchup. We were highlighting it as potentially the hardest first-round matchup going into Champs, and then just because of the way the bracket shakes up, they either had to play FaZe or Surge in that lower bracket. And although you probably would have favored LAT heading into that matchup, Surge just they were able to clutch up in a Game 5. So it's just a little bit different in comparison to last year, where it seems like obviously last year the LAT hit their stride right at the end, had momentum, win those last 2 events, and in this case they had a little bit of opposite trajectory where they were stumbling towards the end of the season, and it just it carried over into the way they performed at Champs. So obviously in comparison to last year it's not a good ending, but we saw this team stick, and notably I think what the way it's phrased is they broke the Champs curse of being a team to stick after winning Champs and win an event the following year. I forget what the exact wording is for that, but regardless, this team showed it still has potential. But after a top 8 finish here, and I think they're, on the flank and the Scump Watch part, I think they were saying that potentially most of the team is unrestricted free agents, so it could be a very interesting offseason for the Thieves, especially in the context of a top 8 finish at Champs here.
Yeah. The only reason I say it's similar to OpTic is that they both looked very strong toward 60% or whatever. After Major 3, both these teams looked like they were going to keep improving or stay around the same level, and they both dipped at the end of the year. And they even lost to Seattle to finish their season, which is pretty disappointing. Although I will say LAT, they were 3-0 against, like I said earlier in the show, they were 3-0 against Seattle in Search, and then they ended up losing Game 5, so they were 0-4 actually because they had won Game 2 in that series. Just a really disappointing performance for them because we kind of expected it, right? Or we expected the late season push again, because when they won Major 3, I think we both said are we going to see the same thing as last year? They're just going to keep, they just keep getting stronger. And it's weird how the season ended for them. I don't know what the future holds really. I think LAT and Seattle both banked on kind of the chemistry this year, of keeping a roster together, keeping the coaches together. I think the only real change for LAT was Mud Dog moved away from the general manager position, and I believe it was Novus ended up taking that position, coincidentally from coming from Seattle, and then Revan took the GM spot in with Seattle. But not a lot of changes for those teams, and it didn't really ended up working out for either one of them. A little bit better for Seattle, I guess, at the end of the year, in LAT throughout the entire season. But yeah, I don't really know. I don't know what to make of that, because LAT just really the only wins that they had since Major 4, they 3-0'd London twice, and they beat OpTic 3-0 at Major 5. So like they won 3 matches after Major 4, 2 of which against the worst team in the league, and 1 against OpTic, who might as well have been the worst team in the league at that point, because they were really bad at Major 5. Like that was the 0-6 event. So I tend to think that they played worse than London at Major 5. Well, they did by placing.
London did win a series.
Yeah. So, but still, it's a disappointing result for LAT. Disappointing result for all 11 of these teams that didn't win champs. I'm sure the 4 teams that weren't at champs, I'm sure they're pretty disappointed with everything. Kleeser was very good on the desk from what I saw, though. Our boy Clay, he got to celebrate Father's Day watching one of his sons, Hydra, his very French son, win his first world championship. Yeah, I don't think that there's a ton else to talk about champs. I do want to mention before we get out of here, though. Do you have anything else on champs before I kind of pivot?
No, I was just going to say, for the 2 teams we didn't really talk about, tee up for potential RosterMania stuff. I think Snoopy played pretty well this event. I don't have his specific numbers, but I know just off the top of my head, I feel like maybe it was the control against FaZe. I think I said that was the map that Boston won the LS Elo control, and I think Snoopy played really well in that map in particular against FaZe, which obviously FaZe is FaZe, and Snoopy's playing his debut event. So small sample size for him regardless of the end result, but I'm interested to see what Boston decides to do with him going into next year, if they decide to keep him around and build around him. But obviously they have a lot of rookies, 3 in Beans, Kremp, and Snoopy, who you would think are in the first year of their contract, so they're in a position where they could potentially do like the 1+1 and extend them if they decide to go that route. And then obviously the question of whether Big Wake's sticking around or not, but obviously Big Wake has Big Wake moments, and if he's like the veteran presence on that team, it's a question of whether you want him to be the veteran presence, just because he's not technically a super veteran player himself. But regardless, I think Boston has some questions and decisions to make in the offseason that should be interesting. And then same with Minnesota. I wouldn't be surprised if they have a completely different team, but the one name, outside of, obviously all of the names aside from Fame are pretty veteran guys at this point. But Afro in particular, I'm going to be interested to see what happens with him, just because it seemed like he was like kind of on a path to being like a star SMG player, and he kind of just got benched, and we haven't really heard much from him. I don't think he was playing in challengers. If he did, I don't think I really heard much about it. So interested to see what happens for Afro in the future. But yeah, I just think going forward, this is set up to be a pretty wild RosterMania period. I got a feeling.
I think that puts a nice bow on champs. Again, congrats to NYSL. Congrats on the CDL for getting through another season. It's been a bumpy ride, but I thought the event looked really good. The fans were incredible this weekend. Made for a very good experience, at least watching it from home. I think the viewership stuff was like right below 300,000 peak viewers, which is lower than some of the other majors, but when OpTic and LAT go out early, FaZe isn't in the grand finals. I think all things considered, that's a pretty good result for the CDL. And we've said it before, like the viewership stuff is not something we focus on a ton, on this podcast at least, because like I'm not gonna root for OpTic to win every event because I know it's gonna be good for viewership. Like that's not how it works. I want it to be competitive and entertaining, and this tournament was very much that. So congrats to everyone involved. The only stuff that I have to bring up other than champs was related to challengers. We don't obviously talk a ton about challengers. Well, we don't talk anything about challengers, let's be honest. But I did want to give a congratulations to OMiT, which has GotterX, a former Minnesota RØKKR player, as well as Yeez, who was the Florida Mutineers substitute, I believe last year or 2 years ago, and Gwen, who is the Seattle Surge's substitute player, as well as Purge. Those guys under the OMiT banner ended up winning Challengers Finals. They won $60,000. They beat a European team, so that should make you happy. Eric Boom, Maple, Weeman, and Metals, and Methods, the Spanish Methods, was coaching them, so that's pretty cool. Anything other to note is you finished third at Challengers Finals. But
yeah. I thought you were going somewhere else with this.
Yeah,
I thought you were
that was my next thing.
Jimbo. Okay.
Yeah. So Jimbo, I mean, if you're a CDL fan, you probably already know the story. You definitely probably know the name, especially if you've watched our or listened to our podcast before. But Jimbo played for the Paris Legion last year for a few months. I don't know how long. He wasn't there for the entire season. But the Paris Legion were horrifically bad last year, worst year in CDL history, and he was some part of that. And he played with Tom Gravity, who we mentioned on this podcast earlier, and some other players to form Team Orbit, which is like a pretty well-known European brand if you followed CDL for a long, or the COD scene for a long time. But he was representing Orbit this past weekend at Challengers Finals, and during their match against the eventual champions OMiT, Jimbo's account got banned mid-game during a hard point. At the time, Jimbo tweeted that Activision told him that there was a mistake, or that they don't know why he got banned. His quote was, "Activision said they'll unban me, no reasons why I got banned." That was 3:18 Eastern. I think about 4 o'clock Eastern, it came out that they were forfeiting, or they were essentially disqualified from Challengers Finals, as Jimbo's ban was, like what we got from Activision is it seemed to be legitimate. You reached out to Activision on Dot's behalf, and if you want to read the story, go to dotesports.com, and we wrote about this. Activision spokesperson said, yesterday, Team Ricochet executed a ban waive that impacted over 1,500 accounts across Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone for cheating and hacking offenses. That was the entire statement when asked about Jimbo and this situation, which seems to indicate that he had been cheating or hacking online, and they did a ban waive, which is pretty common in Call of Duty, and it just so happened that he was literally mid-map at Challengers Finals on LAN when his account got banned. Pretty ridiculous, all things considered. His team, of course, had to forfeit. They were disqualified from the rest of the tournament, and the reactions to this was they were pretty negative, as you could imagine, toward Jimbo. Nero, who played for the Boston Breach and finished the season in Challengers, said dropped a 1.5 in challengers, but a 0.5 in the league, and you guys didn't suspect anything. Guy is the best online player I ever played after Anthrax. Censor, who've discussed quite a bit, also on the Boston Breach Academy team, and I believe he lost to Jimbo a few times at LAN events. Censor said, Jimbo is officially a hacking cheater. I knew he was hacking this entire time, and out of respect for Gravity, I kept it quiet. Didn't have proof either. What a loser, man. I expect Boston Academy to have a Challenger Cup championship because he hacked on us in the finals. Some other reactions, Parasite saying, it's so weird because there were many times where he would play terribly, wonder when he started cheating or why it took him so long to get banned. Johnny, who also played for the Paris Legion last year with Jimbo, said, bro, I teamed with Jimbo for the first 2 lands, frying online, and was wondering WTF was happening when we couldn't, when we would get to LAN. I mean, if he is legitimately hacking, which I have no reason to believe otherwise at this point, I'm glad he got banned, and in a very embarrassing way, because that's so bad to get banned while you're playing on LAN. But I feel really bad for his teammates who, like I'm assuming that they didn't know or anything, or I think there were accusations against him, but as we've seen in the past, like there's a lot of accusations against players that just get better. I mean, there were definitely hacking accusations against Celium when he was coming up in IW, and I don't want to say that Jimbo in Challengers is the same as Celium, but it's not uncommon for people to accuse others of cheating when they might be better, but it just...
I mean, the big one there is Awakening. When Awakening first came out, I remember Crimsix in particular was literally like, this guy is just cheating, and now, I don't think we've really heard anything about that since.
Also, Mac in MW, because he came up in the online portion of the 2020 season, and I believe a Slacked was just openly insinuating that he's cheating, and that we'll see what happens when he gets to LAN.
I have the clip saved because I think it was around the time of the famous Jim execution clip, so I think it's like in my bookmarks next to it. It's like Slack saying, I'm gonna slap the mullet off his head or something like that. I'm gonna go back and watch it after the show now.
Yeah, so it's not a new thing, but it is pretty rare to get banned while on LAN. But I mean, that's COD for you. That's just how things go, I guess.
Yeah, only thing I'll say on the subject, really, I mean, well, I guess it's not only one thing, but this does not necessarily like the hacking stuff, but this reminds me, might be a throwback to some, not even necessarily longtime fans, but just older fans in COD, Supreme Agility. I don't remember the exact name, or sorry, not name, but the exact circumstances of what happened, but I just remember it was a thing where like he was supposed to show up to an event and like just didn't show up, and like he deactivated his Twitter and we didn't really hear from him after that. There's a guy on Epsilon too. Was it like Nathan or something like that?
Yeah.
And it was like he just like fell off the face of the earth. Yeah, you could say like something like Dylan COD even. Like we really haven't heard from him much. And now obviously Jimbo hasn't tweeted anything since that, now infamous tweet of saying that Activision's gonna let him go. But yeah, I mean, overall, just if he's cheating, good riddance. Probably last we'll hear of him. Don't need anything like that in this scene. But I do gotta say, like, I think it was Gravity who tweeted something about like potentially like it tarnishing his reputation because he teamed and stuff like that. I think especially with a guy like Nicky D Classic on that team, like, he's a multi-time champion and multiple different titles, and Nicky D has the respect of everybody in the community. I feel like it's not an overstatement to say that. So obviously I hope it doesn't negatively impact either Nicky D or Tom Gravity, or I think Gio was their fourth. I don't really know much about him, but I hope it doesn't negatively impact them, especially if it is true that they had no idea their teammate was hacking, which I don't think they did. But Yeah, I think, it's probably, the last we hear about Jimbo, unless there's some substantial evidence that comes out down the road here that he wasn't cheating, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case.
Yeah, probably not. I don't remember any of these situations where they actually cleared their name, where they were accused or banned or whatever.
It's different than like those other names we mentioned. None of those guys were
Yeah,
accused of hacking and cheating, and they kind of just like fell off and not even fell off really. They had
they just
situations happen and
left.
they just disappeared. Yeah, so wouldn't be surprised if Jimbo joins the category in the sense of we don't really hear from him ever again in this sense.
Yeah. I think that about does it. I do want to point to this tweet because it's blowing up on the timeline.
Yep.
Censor, he guess he was on Reverse Sweep, the podcast, and I think he advocated for Dashy getting dropped or something along those lines. I definitely don't have time to watch it in the middle of the podcast,
Yeah.
but he said, "I love Dashy. I always saw unlimited potential in him. Hopefully, he takes this the right way." And Dashy replied saying, "Say whatever BS to stay relevant in this community because the gameplay surely isn't doing it, brother." With the thumbs up emoji because he's a little heated right now. I mean that's a good place to leave it. I Censor replied saying, "You're right. I've been in challengers for years, fighting for a spot. Hopefully, I get mine soon. I can put you in the place you deserve to be." Dashy said, "Maybe next year is the one, bro. Keep at it." And that's kind of where we leave it now. Maybe Censor and Dashy will not be teaming up on OpTic Texas next year. I might be bold to go out on a limb like that, but it doesn't seem like that will be the roster move that OpTic will make. But we will be talking about a ton of RosterMania stuff next week. I mean, selfishly, I hope nothing drops so we can kind of speculate freely without knowing what's happening. I don't know if that'll really be the case, but I have hopes for that.
I think what's going to happen and what I want to say before we wrap things up too is as is tradition in the Call of Duty scene, there are inevitably going to be a lot of bait tweets where it seems like something may be happening and then we don't really hear about it. Hopefully I know Crone obviously isn't doing as much reporting these days, but hopefully we get some, reputable reports that actually have substance to them as opposed to just like bait tweets, kind of like I was just hinting at, which
eye emojis
are all stuff like that's always going to happen. So just keep your eyes out. I think the bigger thing too is I would be surprised if any moves or acquisitions are confirmed before the next time we go live.
Yeah.
The only thing that could happen is some players start to announce like whether they're unrestricted or restricted free agents. Which for the most part, if you are an unrestricted free agent, that means you're just going to be free to sign with any team you want. If you're a restricted free agent, there's usually a buyout associated with you, but the team is basically allowing you to explore options to potentially move to another team.
Yep, it's going to be cool. There's going to be a lot of roster changes because the teams that stuck last year, LAT, Seattle, it didn't work out in their favor. Atlanta FaZe, they made a roster change. It didn't end up with a championship or even a Champs Grand Finals appearance.
They got one championship.
I meant the CoD Champs. I think we could probably say that New York is probably not going to make a change. They're at least recently, none of the defending champions have made a change other than Clayster getting dropped because they went 5v5 to 4v4, but that was it. And they wouldn't have made that change otherwise. So
that was literally the day after they won champs. So I think we're in the clear. I don't think the league's going to 3v3 or 5v5 right now.
I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, a lot of stuff to talk about. I'm glad that we've gotten through another CDL season. This is our third season, I believe, right? That we've covered the Call of Duty League. We are 84 episodes deep. It's been a long journey. Thank you guys for really supporting us over the past 3 years or whatever it's been, 2 years. And these last 84 episodes, please stick with us for another 84,000 episodes that we're going to do just in the off season. We're going to work Bink like a dog. But thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Like we said in the pre-show, I will have cut this part. So if you're not watching live, you wouldn't have heard this otherwise, but our YouTube video for the podcast, for the last podcast, our Champs preview, our fourth best YouTube video. I'm not sure what it did for our podcast listens, but if it's just about the same, like that's still great. We just appreciate your support. I looked at like the weekly numbers, the monthly numbers. This season was by far our most successful. We had more people watching our videos, more people listening to the podcast. And that's just amazing. Like, we don't really promote the podcast very much. It's more just kind of doing it because we like doing it. We like talking about COD. And it's been a really fun ride. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening or watching on. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Music. We're on all of those. If you're on YouTube and you're watching this, like the video, subscribe. If you want to watch live podcasts when we actually are recording them, maybe you could talk to us in chat. Like the youngest Jim was in here earlier in the podcast, and Bink was talking to him in the chat. You could watch live at twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. And the best way to find out when we go live is, one, to follow the Twitch channel, but also to follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2 Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. Bink always posts a tweet and a GIF of the stream link when we go live. So if you're ever interested in tuning in live. Last thing I will say before we get out of here is I cede you the crown for Pick'em this year. It was a very tough fight. We pretty much were neck and neck. I don't think I ever got the lead, but we were very close pretty much throughout the entire year. You ended up finishing with a 3-match lead on me. A little bit was you had 1-match lead earlier in the season, throughout the regular season, and then you finished with a better champs record as well. So congratulations to Justin Binkowski on the Ego Chall Pick'em record championship. But that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
I will concede there's a little bit of an asterisk that is partially my fault. Obviously because of my COVID situation at the start of the season, we didn't get to do predictions for Major 1. So who knows what would have happened. Maybe you just absolutely smoked me at Major 1, then you would be hoisting the Pick'em trophy. So you can at least hold on to that. There'll be an asterisk next to the
This is
the
your
Pick'em
bubble
title,
championship.
yeah, I got 2 Pick'em champ. We didn't do one the first year because that's what we were still doing, Pick'em with Mike and all the boys. But now, I am technically 2-0 in Ego Chall Podcast yearly Pick'em. So
1.5-0.
we'll look to go for the 3-peat or the 2.5 Pete next year. But no, all seriousness, thank you guys as always for all the support. Really does mean a lot and appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed this entire season. I know MW2 2022 hasn't been the most liked game in the community by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think there were definitely a lot of exciting moments. Even the last couple of years with Vanguard, I've always held the position that even with the game not being the best or most enjoyable to play, there are certainly entertaining moments in the competitive scene, at least, and the pros do a good job of putting on a show. And then obviously the outside the server stuff is just an added benefit for the COD scene. But Yeah, just in general, hope you guys enjoyed the season. Hope you guys enjoyed Champs. Kind of talked about it at length in this episode. But once again, congratulations to New York. Congratulations to Hydra on winning season MVP. Congratulations to Scrap for winning Rookie of the Year. Was just a really exciting season. Great way to end it off with a pretty convincing 5-0 series that probably not a lot of people expected just a 5-0 in that sense. But nonetheless was all, very entertaining, and I had a good time doing the podcast with you, had a good time watching and all that good stuff. So hope you guys stick around for what we are both anticipating to be a hectic and entertaining off season. If this Doug and Dashy drama is any indication, not even talking about necessarily particular roster moves, but we should be in for plenty more good episodes ahead down the road. So thank you guys as always. And remember to send the chow.